Nazi Germany's reputation for handling prisoners of war was, to say the least, horribly negative, having the repute for executing captives, torturing suspects, and allowing for their detainees to endure starvation, abuse, and terrible conditions in jails and camps. Many Allied servicemen knew of the risks of falling into German hands, but would do their best not to reveal any intel to their captors, despite being sleep-deprived, beaten, and starved by the Gestapo. That said, not all interrogators used the same methods for gaining information, and some were able to manipulate POWs into giving up highly sought-after Allied military intelligence. During the Second World War, any Allied POWs, particularly officers, captured during the war were questioned by the Nazi for vital military information before being transferred to prison camps. One of the most accomplished and recognized interrogators for the Luftwaffe was Hanns Scharff, a businessman who was forced to serve the Nazi regime. Scharff used manipulation tactics and kindness to coerce prisoners into revealing intel to him, rather than the traditional Gestapo processes of interrogation, using torture and abuse. Despite his service in handling POWs for the Germans, Scharff was never accused of brutality or cruelty and was allowed to leave Europe at the end of the war. He was invited to the United States, where he taught interrogation techniques to military personnel, federal agents, and police, and went on to establish himself as a popular mosaic artist in New York and Los Angeles. But how does one man go from investigating POWs for the Nazis to making incredible pieces of art across the USA without any question of integrity? Welcome to History Decoded, and today we will examine the intriguing life of Hanns Scharff, whose work as an interrogator made him an inspiration of military cross-examination processes and procedures, while his creations in the post-war period included producing intricate works that was featured at a variety of locations, including Disney World. The inadvertent soldier, from the business world to top interrogator. Unlike many of his compatriots and countrymen, Hans Joachim Scharff did not volunteer to serve in the German military at the onset of the Second World War, instead finding himself stuck in Germany and forced to take part in the war. Born in 1907 in East Prussia, in what is now northeastern Poland, Scharff was the second of three sons of decorated German officer Hans Hermann and his wife, Else, whose father owned and operated a large and prominent textile mill in Germany. When he was young, Scharff and his family moved to Leipzig, where the boys began their education, and Hans Hermann worked at the mill for his father-in-law between tours of duty, serving in the Wehrmacht in World War I. Around the age of 10, Scharff's father was killed in action and was recognized for his service to Germany with multiple medals and commendations. While he would have preferred to have his father, the young Hans was incredibly proud of his father and all that he had done in his military service. Scharff grew up around the family textile business and, while also honing his artistic abilities, he had cultivated his skills in entrepreneurship and marketing, as well in the finer points of textile production. After the death of his younger brother, Scharff moved to South Africa to work as a sales representative for the overseas division of the family business, and then for Adler Motorwork. While living in Johannesburg, he became fluent in English and establishing a great life for himself as a well-liked businessman. It was also here where Scharff met and then married Margaret Stokes, the daughter of distinguished World War I Royal Air Force Ace Captain Claude Stokes, who was also the first pilot in Rhodesia, modern-day Zimbabwe and Zambia. The pair soon started a family and thrived in South Africa. In 1939, Scharff, his wife, and their children traveled to Germany to visit Scharff's mother and older brother. While on vacation in the fatherland, the Second World War began, and the Scharff family found themselves unable to escape because of the conflict. Scharff eventually found work in Berlin, but was ultimately conscripted into the Wehrmacht for national service. After basic training, Scharff was preparing to be sent to serve on the developing Eastern Front to fight the Soviet Union when Margaret intervened, managing to get an audience with the head of his division. She explained that her husband's life would be wasted on the front since he was fluent in English and could be far more useful to the Nazi regime elsewhere and far from the Russian frontier. The officers transferred Scharff back to Germany to train as an interpreter before he was sent to serve in the Luftwaffe as an interrogator for English-speaking Allied prisoners of war. It was at the Auswärtsstelle West Center in Frankfurt where Scharff was introduced to the Nazi techniques of cross-examination of prisoners and suspects. These methods were traditionally brutal, often including beatings, sleep deprivation, solitary confinement, and starvation, hoping to weaken the resolve of POWs and force them into giving up intel. Scharff was horrified at these practices and instead developed a different tactic for talking to POWs, focusing on treating all of his charges as men and his equals. Rather than attempting to intimidate Allied servicemen, Scharff was far gentler with them than his fellow interrogators, focusing on talking with the prisoners as if they were two men negotiating a deal over a new car. He would greet them in fluent English and ask them nonsensical questions, tell jokes, and share stories as he tried to get them to relax, feel more comfortable, and see him as someone they could confide in instead of fear. One of the most popular techniques Scharff used was to make the prisoners believe he already knew everything about them and their missions, as if it was something everyone in the Nazi military knew about these facts, so nothing the prisoners said would be outside the realm of what was already known. This allowed POWs to think anything they said to Scharff was nothing new. Therefore, they had revealed nothing. This was a popular ruse that allowed Scharff to gain the trust of his prisoners and gain insight into Allied plans. Scharff would indirectly and directly reference the Allied objectives, allowing the POWs to inadvertently confirm these facts or claims. He would tell his prisoners that the Gestapo was going to come and get them if these POWs, and to try and avoid this, many prisoners did tell Scharff various pieces of military intelligence. Scharff also relied on kindness and made sure any and all wounded Allied servicemen received top care at the German hospitals. He would take the POWs with him on quiet walks, showing them the sights of the landscape of the beautiful German countryside. Margaret Scharff baked cakes and other goodies for her husband to bring with him to his interrogations, where Scharff would gift these treats to his prisoners, explaining that his British wife wished her countrymen and the Allies well. Scharff also informed the prisoners that these gifts and conversations were going to vanish as a result of pressures from his superiors, and he would have to hand the POWs to the Gestapo for a more traditionally unpleasant management of prisoners. Many POWs tried to remain in Scharff's charge, feeling far safer there than in that of the Gestapo commanders, and would sometimes provide pieces of intel to Scharff to try and be kept under Scharff's watchful eye before being transferred to a POW camp. Scharff became known as a master interrogator and interviewed many Allied POWs throughout the war. Major Dwayne Beeson, a renowned American flying ace for the U.S. Army Air Force, was interviewed by Scharff, as was Lieutenant Martin J. Monty, a pilot who infamously deserted the American Army Air Force to serve in the Waffen-SS as a writer and propagandist for the German cause. Scharff, having interrogated him, was later called upon by the U.S. government to testify at his treason hearing in 1948, helping to prove his involvement in the SS. One of Scharff's most famous POWs was Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who had distinguished himself as a top airman for the U.S. Army Air Force. Scharff talked with him, and the two became friendly. While Gabreski never revealed anything to Scharff, the two men respected each other and were able to develop a real friendship that lasted long after the war's end. In 1983, during a reunion for Stalag Luft 3 POWs in Chicago, the two would even go on to reenact the interrogation they had had. Many of the POWs Scharff interviewed did reveal more than they had planned to, as the kindness and pleasantries lowered their guard. Scharff's methods were both revolutionary and clever, and were incredibly successful compared to the treatment of prisoners by his fellow interrogators, who relied on intimidation and fear to get information. While not always successful, Scharff focused on treating all of his prisoners as men, fellow soldiers, and equals, and not a cruel enemy. After the war, artist and father. After the war's end, Scharff and his family emigrated to the United States. He was invited to teach interrogation techniques at the Pentagon, and his instruction was adopted as a standard for interviewing prisoners and suspects and became a popular method of interrogation by American police, federal agencies, and military personnel. Scharff wrote a memoir about his experiences as a Nazi interrogator, and much of his writings were used to help verify information of Allied involvements during the war. Later, a biographical book called The Interrogator, the story of Hanns Scharff, Luftwaffe's master interrogator, was published by Raymond Tolliver in 1978, helped many learn complicated details of the Second World War from a unique perspective. Shortly after arriving in the United States, Scharff began pursuing art in the U.S., creating mosaics and decorating furniture. Thanks to his skills as a salesman and his business background, Scharff thrived and went on to found Hanns Scharff Designs. His work was quickly picked up by other companies, which this allowed him to make a lot of money while living in New York City. After moving to Los Angeles, Scharff pursued further opportunities as a design artist and expanded his clientele across the country in multiple segments of the United States, from public, business, and private sectors. In 1971, Scharff hired his daughter-in-law, Monica, to to work with him on developing the business, and the pair were hired by Disney World in Orlando to create mosaics for the park. This was where Scharff created one of his most remembered and famous pieces, 5 15-foot highly detailed mosaics inside the famous Cinderella castle, depicting the Cinderella story. These mosaics are still there today and are recognized as an amazing piece of elaborate art at Disney World. After the success of the Cinderella mosaics, Scharff and his daughter-in-law were asked to make more for Disney World, and they made the mosaic entry ramps at the Epcot Center that are also still present at the park today. Scharff was commissioned to create many other mosaics across the country, hired to make marble floors and facades, wall art and ceilings at hotels, schools, malls, churches, businesses, private homes, universities all over the world. One of Scharff's most famous work outside of the Disney mosaics is marble tiled floor at the California State Capitol. In the 1980s, Scharff and Monica became corporate partners and founded Scharff & Scharff as a new commercial organization, working together to expand their business even further. Scharff & Scharff became synonymous with not only beautiful work, but also the incredible business acumen and a deep sense of professionalism in their field. They continued to work together for 26 years until Hanns Scharff passed away on September 10, 1992. Monica continued to run Scharff & Scharff for another 20 years until her death in 2022, continuing the legacy of her father-in-law and producing high-quality mosaics for a variety of customers. Even as part of one of the cruelest military forces to ever exist, not all who served in the German army during World War II committed atrocities. Some, like Hans Joachim Scharff, were just soldiers doing their jobs. Scharff had made a name for himself as a kind and careful interrogator who helped develop modern interrogation techniques that are still used today by military, police, and federal agencies across the world. Scharff's legacy managed to surpass his place in the Nazi regime and instead has been recognized as a prestigious and highly sought-after mosaic artist. His work, as well as his company's art, are still popular and well-known today, particularly for what he created at Disney World's Epcot Center and at Cinderella's castle. The intricate details are stunning and have allowed Scharff to be recognized as someone who rose above the dark legacy of the Second World War. Thank you for watching our video, From Nazi Germany to Disney, The Intriguing Life of Hanns Scharff, here on History Decoded. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. Feel free to leave a comment below about other topics we should cover. Thank you again, and until next time, this is History Decoded.